One piece of paper. That's all it took to turn a billionaire's empire into dust. They say money talks, but in my case, it screamed. I was a nobody, just a waitress serving champagne to people who spent my yearly salary on a single dinner. I thought I was invisible. I thought I didn't matter. Until the most powerful man in the city dropped a confidential file at my feet. I leaned down to pick it up, trying to be helpful. But when the cover slipped open, I didn't see a business contract or a stock report. I saw my own name, and next to it a single word that made my blood run cold: liquidation. The air inside l'Orangerie always smelled the same expensive perfume, truffle oil, and old money. For Sarah Vance, it was the smell of aching feet and suppressed rage. Sarah adjusted her apron, wincing as the stiff fabric dug into her waist. She had been on her feet for 10 hours. Her bank account was overdrawn by $40, her rent was due in 3 days, and her landlord, Mr. Henderson, had already threatened to change the locks. She was 24 years old, drowning in debt from her late mother's medical bills, and effectively invisible to the elite clientele she served. Table 4 needs water. Vance. Stop daydreaming. The floor manager, Henri, hissed as he walked past, snapping his fingers near her face. Yes, Henri. Right away, Sarah murmured, keeping her head down. She grabbed a crystal pitcher and moved toward table 4. It was the prime spot in the restaurant, a semi-private alcove reserved for the city's royalty. Tonight it was occupied by Alistair Thorne. Everyone knew Alistair Thorne. He was the CEO of Thorne Heavy Industries, a man whose face was plastered on Forbes covers and nightly news segments. He was 45, handsome, in a predatory, shark-like way, with eyes that looked like chipped flint. He was currently yelling into a sleek, black phone, ignoring the terrified associate sitting across from him. Bavou, I don't care about the optics, Marcus, just bury it. Thorne snarled his voice, carrying across the hushed dining room. If the board finds out the trust fund wasn't empty when the old man died, we are all going to prison. Do you understand me? Burn the files. Sarah froze for a split second. The raw aggression in his voice was terrifying. She approached the table cautiously to refill the water glasses. Mr. Thorne, please, the associate whispered, looking around nervously. Not here. I own this place. I'll speak how I damn well please, Thorne snapped. He slammed his hand on the table, and the vibration sent a thick, leather-bound folder sliding off the edge. It happened in slow motion. The folder tipped over the edge of the mahogany table. Sarah, reacting on pure instinct, lunged to catch it before it hit the pristine floor. She missed the catch, but she dropped to her knees just as the folder hit the ground. The impact caused the leather strap to pop open. Papers fanned out across the marble tiles near Sarah's knees. Don't touch that! Thorne roared, leaping from his chair. But it was too late. Sarah was already gathering the papers, her eyes trained to scan receipts, and complex orders in seconds locked onto the bold header of the top document. Confidential. Asset liquidation strategy. Subject Vance estate target. Sarah Elizabeth Vance. Status pending removal, time stopped. Sarah stared at the paper. Sarah Elizabeth Vance. That was her full name. Not just Sarah Vance. Sarah Elizabeth Vance. Why was her name in the briefcase of a billionaire defense contractor? And what did pending removal mean? A hand made of iron clamped around her wrist. Sarah gasped, dropping the papers as Alistair Thorne yanked her upward. He wasn't looking at her like a clumsy waitress anymore. He was looking at her like a hunter looks at a deer that just stepped on a twig. What did you see? Thorne's voice was a low, dangerous rumble. He was so close she could smell the scotch on his breath. Nothing, sir. Sarah stammered, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. I'm sorry I dropped it. Thorne's eyes narrowed. He didn't blink. He scanned her face, searching for a lie. He looked at her name tag. Sarah. His pupils dilated, a flicker of something recognition. Fear crossed his stoic face. He shoved her back hard enough that she stumbled against the service station. "Get out of my sight!" Thorne hissed quickly, scooping up the papers and shoving them back into the folder. He looked at Henry, who had rushed over, pale and sweating. "Fire her. Now. If I see her in this building in the next 5 minutes, I'm buying the block and bulldozing it. Sarah Kitchen now!" Henry shrieked. Sarah didn't argue. She turned and ran her hands, shaking so badly she could barely untie her apron. She didn't stop in the locker room to change. She grabbed her coat and ran out the back door into the rainy alleyway. The image of that document burned into her retinas. Target Sarah Elizabeth Vance. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a loose end. Sarah didn't go straight home. Paranoia, cold and sharp, pricked at the back of her neck. She took 3 different buses, doubling back through the crowded subway station at Grand Central, just like she'd seen in movies. It felt ridiculous, melodramatic, until she remembered the look in Alistair Thorne's eyes. That wasn't the look of an angry customer. That was the look of a man who had just realized he left a loaded gun on a playground. She lived in a crumbling studio apartment in Queens, nestled between a laundromat and a bodega that sold expired milk. When she finally locked the 3 deadbolts on her door, she slid down against the wood and hyperventilated. "Okay, Sarah. Think," she whispered to the empty room. She scrambled over to her cracked laptop and opened a browser. Her hands were shaking so much she kept hitting the wrong keys. She typed Alistair Thorne history. Results flooded the screen. CEO of Thorne Heavy Industries. Philanthropist of the Year. Acquired Vance Logistics in 2005, following the death of founder Arthur Vance. Sarah stopped. Vance Logistics. Her mother, Mary Vance, had been a single mum who worked 2 jobs until she died of cancer 3 years ago. She rarely spoke about her family. She had always told Sarah that her father died before she was born, and that her parents, Sarah's grandparents, had disowned her for getting pregnant young. "Arthur Vance," Sarah whispered. She opened a new tab. Arthur Vance obituary. Arthur Vance, shipping magnate and founder of Vance Logistics, died peacefully at his estate in 2005. He is survived by his protégé and appointed executor Alistair Thorne. No immediate family. "No immediate family," Sarah read aloud. "That's a lie." She scrambled under her bed and pulled out an old shoebox. It smelled like lavender and dust, her mother's keepsake box. Inside were old photos, a locket, and a birth certificate. Sarah pulled out her mother's birth certificate. Mary Alice Vance. Father Arthur Vance. Mother Eleanor Vance. He was my grandfather. Sarah realized the room spinning. Arthur Vance was my grandfather. She looked back at the screen. Thorne had taken over the company in 2005. That was the year Arthur died. If Mary was his daughter, why didn't she inherit anything? Why did they live in poverty while Alistair Thorne bought $50 million penthouses? And then the darker realization hit her. The document said, "Target Sarah Elizabeth Vance," and status pending removal. They weren't just hiding money, they were cleaning house. A heavy knock on her door made her jump so hard she nearly knocked the laptop off the table. Boom! 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 "Sarah Vance, this is the NYPD. Open up!" Sarah's breath hitched. "Police." Had Henri called the cops because she ran out? She crept toward the peephole. Standing in the hallway wasn't a uniformed officer. It was 2 men in dark suits. They wore earpieces. One of them was holding a heavy black bag. They didn't look like police. They looked like the men who stood in the corners of l'Orangerie watching the exits. "Miss Vance, we know you're in there," the man said. His voice was calm, almost bored. Mr. Thorne would like to offer you a settlement for your wrongful termination tonight. He feels very guilty. Please open the door. A settlement. At 11:30 p.m., Sarah backed away from the door. Her eyes darted to the fire escape window. We have a check here for $50,000. The man continued. We just need you to sign a non-disclosure agreement. Standard procedure. $50,000. That would pay off her debts. That would change her life. But then she remembered the word on the file. Liquidation. You don't liquidate a person with a check. You liquidate them by making them disappear. I'm not dressed, Sarah yelled through the door, her voice trembling. Give me a minute. You have 30 seconds, Miss Vance, the man replied. The tone had shifted. It wasn't polite anymore. Sarah grabbed her backpack. She shoved the laptop, her mother's keepsake box, and her phone into it. She grabbed a hoodie and yanked it on. She quietly slid the window up. The rusty metal shrieked. She's running! The man outside yelled. The front door exploded inward with a deafening crash. The wood splintered as the two men kicked it down. Sarah didn't look back. She scrambled out onto the fire escape, the cold rain hitting her face instantly. She heard heavy boots storming into her tiny apartment. "Secure the target!" one of them shouted. Sarah swung her leg over the railing and jumped to the ladder. She slid down the metal, tearing at her palms. She hit the alley floor hard, rolling to absorb the impact, and sprinted toward the streetlights. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew one thing for sure. Alistair Thorne wasn't trying to pay her. He was trying to erase her. Sarah spent the night riding the E-train back and forth from World Trade Center to Jamaica Center. It was the only place she felt safe, surrounded by tired commuters and insomnia-ridden New Yorkers. By the time the sun rose gray and bleak over the city, she had a plan. Or at least the skeleton of one. She needed help. She couldn't go to the police. Thorne was a defense contractor. He probably had the police commissioner on speed dial. She needed someone who knew the law but hated the system. She remembered a name her mother had mentioned once years ago when she was drunk on cheap wine and crying about the past. Uncle Marcus tried, baby. He tried to stop them, but they broke him. Sarah opened her laptop again, leeching Wi-Fi from a Starbucks while hiding in the back corner. Marcus. Lawyer. Vance Logistics. She found him. Marcus Reynolds, disbarred in 2006 for misconduct and substance abuse. She searched for his current address. It wasn't a law firm. It was a dive bar in Hell's Kitchen called the Rusty Anchor. Public records listed him as the owner. It was a long shot, a desperate shot, but it was all she had. At 10:00 a.m., Sarah walked into the Rusty Anchor. It smelled of stale beer and regret. The floor was sticky, and the only light came from a neon sign buzzing over the bar. A man was wiping down the counter. He looked to be in his 60s, with graying hair tied back in a ponytail, and a face that looked like a road map of bad decisions. He wore a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing a faded tattoo of the scales of justice on his forearm. "We're closed, kid." He grunted without looking up. "Are you Marcus Reynolds?" Sarah asked, her voice steady, despite her fear. The man paused. He slowly set down the rag and looked at her. His eyes were bloodshot, but sharp. "Who's asking?" "My name is Sarah Vance. I'm Mary's daughter." The glass in Marcus's hand slipped. It hit the floor and shattered the sound, echoing like a gunshot in the empty bar. Marcus stared at her, his mouth slightly open. He looked as if he had seen a ghost. Mary is..." She passed away. 3 years ago, Sarah said, "and now Alistair Thorne is trying to kill me." Marcus's face hardened. The shock vanished, replaced by a sudden, intense focus. He walked around the bar, crushing the broken glass under his boots, and locked the front door. He flipped the sign to "Closed." "Come with me," he said, gesturing to a booth in the back. Once they were seated, Sarah told him everything. The dropped file. The words "Liquidation" and "Target." The men at her apartment. Marcus listened in silence, his jaw clenched so tight, a muscle feathered in his cheek. When she finished, he took a deep breath and ran a hand over his face. "I knew it," Marcus whispered. "I knew that snake didn't destroy all the copies." "Copies of what?" Sarah asked. "Your grandfather's real will," Marcus said, leaning in. "Arthur Vance didn't leave the company to Thorne. Thorne was just the interim CEO. Arthur left the majority share, 51% of the company, to Mary. And if Mary died, it was supposed to go to her issue. Her children. Sarah felt the air leave her lungs. "Me, I own half the company." "You don't just own half, kid," Marcus said, a grim smile forming. "Thorne Heavy Industries is worth $40 billion. You are the majority shareholder. Thorne has been sitting in your chair for 20 years. "But why now?" Sarah asked. "Why is he coming after me now?" "Because of the merger," Marcus explained. "I still have contacts. Thorne is trying to merge with a Chinese tech giant next week. It's the biggest deal of the century. But to do it, he needs to prove absolute ownership of the shares. He must have done an audit and realized there was a loose end, a bureaucratic error that flagged your existence. If the audit found you, the merger fails, and he goes to jail for fraud. So he has to kill me to close the deal," Sarah concluded, a cold chill settling in her bones. "Exactly," Marcus said. He stood up and went behind the bar, reaching for a baseball bat kept near the register. But he made one mistake. "What's that?" "He let you find me." Marcus looked at her, and for the first time, the tired, broken ex-lawyer looked like a warrior. "I loved your grandfather. He was a good man, and I let Thorne ruin me because I was weak. But I'm not drunk today, Sarah, and we are going to burn Alistair Thorne to the ground." "How?" Sarah asked. "He has an army of security. He has billions of dollars. I have $40 and a bus pass." Marcus grinned. It was a dangerous grin. "We have the truth, but we need proof. The file he dropped, that was the kill order. But we need the will, and I know exactly where he keeps it." "Where?" "In the lion's den," Marcus said. "The penthouse vault at Thorne Tower. It's biometric, voice-coded, and guarded by ex-Navy SEALs." Sarah swallowed hard. "So we can't get in." "I can't," Marcus corrected. "But you can." "Me how?" "Because," Marcus said, pulling a dusty blueprint from under the bar counter. "Thorne is hosting the pre-merger gala tomorrow night. A masquerade ball. They need catering staff. And you, Sarah Vance, are the best damn waitress in the city." Sarah looked at the blueprints. A heist. They were planning a heist against the most dangerous man in New York. "If we get caught," Sarah started. "If we get caught, we die," Marcus said bluntly. "But if we win, you get your life back. You get justice for your mother." "Are you in?" Sarah thought about the men kicking down her door. She thought of her mother dying in a charity ward because they couldn't afford a specialist. She thought of Alistair Thorne screaming at her. She looked Marcus in the eye. "I'm in." The earpiece buzzed in Sarah's left ear, a tiny insect-like vibration that made her flinch. "Audio check. Can you hear me, kid?" Marcus's voice was tinny but clear, cutting through the ambient noise of the service elevator. "I hear you," Sarah whispered, adjusting the high collar of her uniform. "I'm in the service lift, approaching the penthouse level." She looked at her reflection in the polished steel doors. She didn't recognize herself. Gone was the messy bun and the stained apron from l'orangerie. Her hair was slicked back into a tight professional chignon. She wore a pristine white tuxedo shirt, a black vest, and black trousers pressed so sharp they could cut glass. Over her eyes sat a simple, elegant black domino mask, standard attire for the staff at the Thorn Masquerade Gala. She looked like a servant, but for the first time in her life, she felt like a spy. "Remember the layout," Marcus instructed. He was back at the Rusty Anchor, monitoring the building's schematics on an old laptop he had dusted off. "The gala is in the main ballroom and the terrace. Thorn's private study is on the mezzanine level, overlooking the dance floor. It's accessible via a spiral staircase in the east corner, but it's guarded." "How do I get past the guard?" Sarah asked, her hands trembling slightly as she smoothed her vest. "You don't," Marcus said grimly. "You wait for the signal. I've got a little surprise rigged in the HVAC system. When the chaos starts, the guard will move. That's your window. You'll have exactly 3 minutes before the backup generators kick in and the security reboot finishes." The elevator dinged. Penthouse level. The door slid open, and a wall of sound hit her. A string quartet played a haunting, frenetic waltz, overlaid by the hum of hundreds of conversations. The smell was intoxicating expensive lilies, roasted duck, and the metallic tang of gold and jewelry. Sarah stepped out into the prep kitchen. It was a war zone of chefs and servers. "You new girl." A head waiter barked, shoving a silver tray of champagne flutes into her hands. "Take this to the West Wing. Don't make eye contact. Don't speak unless spoken to. Go." Sarah took the tray, the weight of the crystal comforting in her hands. It was a familiar weight. It grounded her. She nodded and slipped through the swinging doors into the ballroom. The sight was breathtakingly grotesque. Underneath vaulted glass ceilings, the city's elite danced in masks of feathers, velvet, and gold. They spun in circles, laughing, drinking, completely unaware that the woman weaving through them held the power to destroy their host. Sarah moved with the practiced invisibility of a lifelong server. She offered drinks, ducked heads, and skirted the edges of the room. Her eyes, however, were locked on the mezzanine. There it was, a balcony of tempered glass and steel, and there, standing at the railing like a king surveying his subjects, was Alistair Thorn. He wore a mask of a wolf, silver and jagged. He was holding a glass of scotch, watching the crowd with cold detachment. Beside him stood the 2 men who had kicked down Sarah's door. They were his personal detail, scanning the crowd for threats. Sarah felt a surge of nausea. He was right there. The man who stole her birthright. The man who tried to kill her. "Focus, Sarah." Marcus's voice crackled. "Don't look at him. Look at the staircase." She shifted her gaze. At the bottom of the spiral stairs stood a massive security guard with an earpiece. He wasn't wearing a mask. He was strictly business. "I see the guard," Sarah whispered, pretending to rearrange glasses on her tray. "Good. Get into position near the base of the stairs. The surprise goes off in 10 seconds. Sarah drifted closer, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She offered a glass to a woman in a peacock mask, who took it without looking at her. 5, 4. Marcus counted down. Sarah tensed her muscles. 3, 2, 1. A loud thump echoed through the ventilation ducts above. Suddenly, a thick white cloud of steam blasted out of the vents directly over the buffet table on the east side of the room. Screams erupted. "Fire, fire!" someone shouted. The smoke, harmless, dry ice vapor Marcus had rigged into the system, billowed down, creating instant panic. The string quartet stopped playing. "Secure the perimeter!" The guard at the staircase yelled into his radio. He abandoned his post, rushing toward the perceived fire to protect the guests. "Now, Sarah, go," Marcus shouted. Sarah dropped her tray. The sound of shattering crystal was lost in the chaos. She didn't run. Running drew attention. She walked briskly with purpose, slipping into the shadows of the staircase. She took the steps 2 at a time, her soft-soled shoes silent on the carpet. She reached the mezzanine landing. Below her, the ballroom was a churning sea of confusion. Above her, the hallway to Thorne's office was empty. "I'm on the upper level," she whispered, pressing herself against the wall. "The office is at the end of the hall. Double mahogany doors. It has a smart lock." Sarah sprinted down the hallway. She reached the doors. They were imposing, carved with lions. "It's locked," Sarah said, trying the handle. "Keypad. It's a 4-digit code," Marcus said. "Thorne is arrogant, but he's sentimental about his victories. Try the date your grandfather died. 05 to 12. Sarah punched in the numbers. 05 after 102. A red light flashed. Denied. "Wrong," she hissed. "Damn it," Marcus cursed. "Okay, try the date he took the company public. 1104. Sarah's fingers hovered over the keys. She heard heavy footsteps coming up the spiral stairs behind her. "Someone's coming," she whispered, panic rising in her throat. "Try 1104. She typed it. 11044. Red light. Denied. The footsteps were getting closer. She could hear the radio chatter. "Mezzanine clear. Check the upper level." "Marcus, I'm going to get caught," Sarah said, tears stinging her eyes. "Think Sarah, he's a narcissist. What is the most important day in his life?" Sarah looked at the keypad. She thought about the file. Liquidation. She thought about the man who looked at her with such hatred. "The day he killed the competition," Sarah whispered. She remembered the date on the liquidation file she had seen at the restaurant. It was dated for tomorrow, but the file status said projected 2025. No, that wasn't it. She closed her eyes. Arthur Vance. Her mother said Arthur loved puzzles. Maybe Thorne didn't set the code. Maybe the security system was still the original one Arthur installed. "My birthday," Sarah whispered. "What?" Marcus asked. "My mum said." She said Grandpa Arthur sent a card every year even though they didn't speak. He knew when I was born. It was a wild guess, a desperate, insane guess. She typed in her birthday, 0714. The lock clicked, a green light flashed, the heavy doors swung open. Sarah slipped inside and closed them softly, just as the guard's flashlight beam swept across the hallway, where she had been standing a second ago. "Mezzanine clear," the guard's voice, muffled through the wood. Sarah slumped against the door, exhaling a breath she felt she'd been holding for a lifetime. "I'm in," she said. Thorne's office was not a room. It was a temple to greed. The walls were lined with floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline. The rain lashed against the windows, blurring the city lights into streaks of neon. In the center of the room sat a desk, made of shark skin and obsidian. But Sarah didn't care about the decor. She cared about the wall behind the desk. "Okay, look for the safe," Marcus said. "It won't be a wall safe behind a painting. That's for movies. Thorne uses a subfloor vault. Look under the rug." Sarah ran to the massive Persian rug in the center of the room. She shoved the heavy furniture aside a leather chair that probably cost more than her education, and rolled back the carpet. Nothing. Just polished wood. "There's nothing here, Marcus," she said, scanning the room. "It has to be there. The blueprints." "The blueprints are 20 years old," Sarah snapped. She scanned the room, her eyes darting frantically. She looked at the bookshelves, the statues. Then she saw it. On the wall, displayed in a glass case, was a rusted, beat-up ship's wheel. It looked out of place amidst the modern luxury. "The ship's wheel," Sarah said. "My grandfather started as a merchant marine. That was his first ship's wheel." "Check it," Marcus commanded. Sarah walked over to the case. It wasn't locked. She opened the glass front. She ran her hands along the rough wood of the wheel. On the back of the center, spoke her finger brushed a tiny indentation. A button. She pressed it. A soft hiss of hydraulics filled the room. A section of the obsidian bookshelf slid silently to the left, revealing a steel door set into the wall. It wasn't just a safe. It was a walk-in vault. "Found it," Sarah breathed. "Okay, this is the hard part," Marcus said, his voice tense. "That door is biometric. It requires a retinal scan or a palm print. We don't have Thorne's hand." Sarah stared at the glowing blue scanner pad next to the steel door. "So we're stuck?" "No," Marcus said. "Thorne didn't build this vault. Arthur did, and Arthur was paranoid. He programmed the master key, access to his own genetic line. It's a blood scanner, Sarah. Thorne probably had to hack around it or use a bypass key for years, but the primary protocol should still be active. You want me to put my hand on that? If you really are Arthur Vance's granddaughter, the system will recognize you. If you're not, well, the silent alarm will trigger and the doors will lock you in until the police arrive." Sarah looked at her hand. It was shaking. "Do it, Sarah. Reclaim what's yours." She stepped forward. She placed her palm flat against the cold glass panel. A red laser scanned her hand, moving from wrist to fingertips. Scanning. Scanning. Genetic markers confirmed. "Welcome, Administrator Vance." The text flashed green on the small screen. The heavy steel bolts retracted with a loud clang. Sarah pulled the heavy door open. Inside the vault was small and smelled of old paper. There were stacks of cash millions, probably, and bars of gold. But Sarah ignored them. She went straight to the filing cabinet in the back. She opened the top drawer. It was labeled The Vance Trust. Her hands flew through the files. She found it. A thick envelope sealed with wax. Last will and testament of Arthur James Vance. She tore it open. Her eyes scanned the legal jargon until she found the paragraph that mattered. "I hereby bequeath 51% of Vance Logistics and all subsidiary holdings to my daughter, Mary Alice Vance. In the event of her death, all assets transfer immediately to her surviving issue." "I have it," Sarah said, her voice choking up. "I have the will." "Good. Now get out of there," Marcus urged. Sarah grabbed the will, but as she turned to leave another file on the shelf, caught her eye. It was red, and it had one word written on the spine in black marker: accident. She froze. Accident. She pulled the file. Inside were photos, police reports, photos of a car crash, a car that had gone off a bridge in 2005. Victim Arthur Vance, cause brake failure. But underneath the police report was a mechanic's invoice from a private garage dated 2 days before the crash. Work performed brake line modification. Client A. Thorne. Sarah gasped, clapping a hand over her mouth. "He didn't just steal the company," she whispered, horror washing over her like ice water. "He killed him. Thorne killed my grandfather." "Sarah, get out now," Marcus yelled. "I need this file, too. I need to prove he's a murderer." She shoved the red file into her vest. She turned to run out of the vault. She stepped out of the safe room and froze. Standing in the doorway of the office, blocking her exit, was Alistair Thorne. He was still wearing the wolf mask, but he slowly reached up and pulled it off. His face was twisted in a rictus of pure rage. In his hand, he held a suppressed pistol. Behind him stood the 2 security guards. "I knew I smelled a rat," Thorne said, his voice dangerously calm. He stepped into the room, leveling the gun at Sarah's chest. "You really are persistent, aren't you, little waitress?" Sarah backed up until she hit the desk. She clutched the files to her chest. "You killed him," Sarah said, her voice trembling but loud. "You murdered Arthur Vance." Thorne smiled. It was a cold, dead smile. Arthur was a dinosaur. He didn't have the vision to do what needed to be done. I did him a favor. He cocked the gun. And now, Thorne said, I'm going to do you a favor. I'm going to reunite you with your mother. Marcus! Sarah screamed into the earpiece. I'm here! Marcus shouted. Get down! Suddenly the lights in the entire building cut out. Thorne Tower went pitch black. The emergency lights hadn't kicked in yet. For 3 seconds there was absolute, total darkness. Bang! A gunshot flashed in the dark, blindingly bright. Glass shattered. Sarah threw herself to the floor, rolling toward the side of the heavy obsidian desk. Find her! Thorne screamed in the dark. Kill her! Sarah crawled. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew she had the evidence. She had the truth. And she had to survive the next 5 minutes in a room with a wolf who could see in the dark. The darkness was absolute, a suffocating blanket that turned the opulent office into a tomb. The only light came from the faint, rhythmic strobing of a red alarm LED, high on the wall, pulsing like a dying heartbeat. Sarah didn't stand up. Standing was death. She stayed low, pressing her cheek against the cold plush carpet. Her waitress training kicked in, not the part about serving food, but the spatial awareness. The mental map of the room she had built in seconds. Desk to the left, door to the right, glass shards everywhere. She heard the heavy, deliberate crunch of leather soles on glass. Thorne was moving. You can't hide, Sarah. Thorne's voice drifted from the center of the room, calm and terrifyingly amused. The emergency generators will kick in roughly 30 seconds. And when the lights come back on, I'm going to put a bullet between your eyes and tell the police you were a burglar. Sarah clutched the files to her chest, her knuckles white. She needed a distraction. She needed to get to the door before the lights returned. She felt around in the dark. Her hand brushed against a heavy crystal decanter on the low table beside her. It was heavy, filled with expensive amber liquid. She picked it up, weighing it in her palm. Crunch. Crunch. He was getting closer to the desk. Sarah took a deep breath, wound her arm back, and hurled the decanter with all her strength toward the far corner of the room, near the window. Smash. The crystal shattered against the glass wall. Thorne spun around, and 3 muzzle flashes lit up the room like strobe lights. Bang, bang, bang. He fired blindly at the sound. Sarah moved. She didn't crawl. She scrambled, keeping her silhouette low, lunging toward the open vault door, and past it to the office exit. She burst through the mahogany doors, just as the hallway lights flickered and buzzed back to life. There! One of the guards shouted from the stairwell. Sarah didn't look back. She sprinted. Her lungs burned, her legs screamed, but adrenaline was a powerful fuel. She reached the mezzanine balcony overlooking the ballroom. Below, the chaos had settled into a confused murmur. The smoke had cleared, and hundreds of masked guests were looking around, wondering if the fire was part of the show. Marcus, I need a way out. Sarah screamed into her earpiece, vaulting over a velvet rope. The exits are blocked, Marcus yelled back, the sound of typing furious in the background. They've locked down the building. You can't leave Sarah. You have to end this, now. How they have guns! The presentation, Marcus shouted. The merger presentation starts in 2 minutes. The giant screen behind the stage. It's linked to the central server. If I can patch you in... Do it! Sarah reached the center of the mezzanine. She was trapped. Guards were coming up the stairs on both sides. Thorne was storming down the hallway behind her, his face red with exertion, the gun now tucked into his waistband to avoid terrifying the guests below. Yet, she had nowhere to go but the railing. She ran to the edge of the balcony. Below her, 500 faces looked up. Ladies and gentlemen, Sarah screamed, her voice cracking, but carrying over the hushed room. The crowd gasped. A disheveled waitress in a stolen vest, waving a handful of papers, standing on the Billionaire's private balcony. Thorne burst onto the mezzanine. He grabbed Sarah by the back of her vest, yanking her away from the rail. "Let her go!" a voice bellowed from below. But the crowd did nothing. They were frozen, watching what they thought was a performance art piece. "You stupid girl!" Thorne hissed in her ear, twisting her arm behind her back. The pain was blinding. "You just signed your death warrant in front of the city's elite." "Did I?" Sarah gritted out. "Marcus now!" she screamed. On the massive LED screen behind the stage, a screen meant to display Thorne's face, and stock numbers the image flickered. It distorted, turned to static, and then went black. A second later, a document appeared. It was blown up to 20 feet tall. Mechanic invoice, 05/10/2005. Client Alistair Thorne. Job break line severance. Vance Mercedes. A collective gasp ripped through the ballroom. The whispers turned to shouts. Thorne froze. He looked up at the screen, his face draining of all color. His grip on Sarah loosened just a fraction. Sarah didn't waste the moment. She stomped on his instep with her heel hard. Thorne roared in pain and stumbled back. Sarah spun around, holding up the second document. The will. "He lied to you," Sarah shouted to the crowd, pointing a shaking finger at Thorne. "He didn't inherit this company. He stole it. He murdered Arthur Vance. Cut the feed. Cut the power." Thorne screamed at his guards, panic finally cracking his composure. He fumbled for his gun, but the screen changed again. Now it was a video, a grainy security feed from inside the vault, recorded just moments ago. It showed Thorne pointing a gun at Sarah. It played the audio clearly over the ballroom speakers. "Arthur was a dinosaur. I did him a favor." The confession boomed through the hall, echoing off the marble walls. Thorne stood paralyzed. He looked at the crowd. He saw their phones out. He saw the horror on the faces of his board members. He saw the Chinese investors turning their backs. He looked at Sarah. She wasn't cowering anymore. She stood tall-chest, heaving her eyes, blazing with a fire that money couldn't buy. "It's over, Alistair," she said, her voice steady. Thorne raised the gun, his hand shaking. "If I go down," he snarled, "I'm taking the trash with me. Drop the weapon." The shout didn't come from the guards. It came from the main entrance. A dozen tactical officers in NYPD gear swarmed into the ballroom, weapons drawn. Leading them was a man in a trench coat, Detective Miller, a name Marcus had called in a favor with. And right behind him, limping but grinning, was Marcus Reynolds holding a baseball bat. "Police, drop it." Thorne looked at the police, then at the crowd, then at Sarah. He realized in that split second that he was entirely alone. The power, the money, the fear he instilled it, had all evaporated the moment the truth hit the screen. He let the gun clatter to the floor. Two officers tackled him instantly, slamming his face into the plush carpet of the mezzanine. Sarah leaned against the railing, her legs finally giving out. She slid down to the floor, clutching the will to her chest, as tears of relief finally spilled over. She watched as they cuffed Alistair Thorne. As they dragged him past her, he looked up. His eyes were empty. Sarah didn't look away. She whispered one word. "Checkmate." The immediate aftermath of the gala wasn't the triumphant party the movies always promised. It was a blur of chaotic noise, blinding lights and exhaust fumes. Sarah sat on the bumper of an ambulance outside Thorne Tower, a foil shock blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the New York streets slick and black, reflecting the strobe of red and blue police sirens. She watched as Alistair Thorne, the man who had terrified the business world for 2 decades, was shoved into the back of a squad car. He didn't look like a wolf anymore. Handcuffed, wet, and stripped of his mask, he looked small, Pathetic. "Here," a gruff voice said. Sarah looked up to see Marcus handing her a steaming cup of bodega coffee. He looked different. The haunted, hollow look in his eyes was gone, replaced by a glint of the sharp, dangerous lawyer he used to be. "Did they get the files?" Sarah asked, her voice raspy from the smoke and the screaming. "They got everything," Marcus confirmed, sitting next to her on the bumper. "The mechanic's invoice, the original will, the falsified audit reports from 2005. Detective Miller is already talking about RICO charges. Thorne isn't just going to jail for fraud, Sarah. He's going away for murder. He'll never see the outside of a cell again." Sarah took a sip of the coffee. It was burnt and sugary, but it tasted better than the finest champagne she had ever served. "What happens now?" Marcus looked up at the towering skyscraper above them, where the lights were slowly coming back on floor by floor. Now, the real work begins. You're not just a waitress anymore, kid. You're the owner of a $40 billion conglomerate." The transition of power was brutal. For the first month, the media circus was relentless. Waitress Heiress was the headline on every paper from the New York Times to the tabloids. Paparazzi camped outside her tiny apartment in Queens until Marcus, now acting as her interim chief legal officer, had her moved to a secure suite at the plaza. But the real battle wasn't in the papers. It was in the boardroom. 6 weeks after the arrest, Sarah walked into the executive conference room of Thorne Heavy Industries. The room was cold, smelling of lemon polish and fear. 12 men and women sat around the long mahogany table. These were the survivors, the board members who hadn't been immediately indicted alongside Thorne, but who had turned a blind eye to his methods for years. They looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. To them, she was still just a girl who carried trays. "Ms. Vance," began Charles Sterling, a grey-haired man with a face like a bulldog. He was the chairman of the board and a staunch Thorne loyalist. "We appreciate the unique circumstances of your arrival. However, given your lack of experience, the board has prepared a motion to appoint an interim CEO while you retain a silent beneficiary role. We believe this is best for stock stability." He slid a document across the table. It was a golden parachute disguised as a leash. They wanted to pay her to go away so they could keep running the company the same way. Sarah didn't pick up the document. She didn't even look at it. She stood at the head of the table, placing her hands flat on the polished wood. "Mr. Sterling," Sarah said, her voice calm and echoing in the silent room. "Do you know the price of a gallon of milk?" Sterling blinked, confused. "Excuse me, a gallon of milk, or a monthly subway pass." "Do you know what the current rent is for a studio in the Bronx?" "I fail to see how this is relevant to the management of a global logistics firm." Sterling scoffed, looking around the table for support. "It is relevant," Sarah said, her voice hardening. "Because you handle logistics for people who can't afford to lose a single dollar. You cut corners on safety to boost quarterly margins. I've read the reports, Charles. I spent the last 3 weeks reading every report. You voted to cut the pension fund for the dock workers in 2018. You authorized the use of substandard steel in the cargo fleet to save 4% on production costs." She reached into her portfolio and pulled out a thick stack of papers. She tossed them onto the table. They landed with a heavy thud. "This is my counter-motion," Sarah announced. "Effective immediately, Thorne Heavy Industries is being dissolved." A gasp rippled through the room. "You can't do that!" Sterling shouted, standing up. "This company is worth billions." "The brand is dissolved," Sarah corrected. "We are rebranding to Vance Global, and we are pivoting. No more defense contracts with warlords. No more cutting corners. We are going back to what my grandfather built: ethical shipping and infrastructure. The stock will tank, another board member cried. The shareholders will revolt. Let them, Sarah said coldly. Because if you look at page 4, you'll see that as the majority shareholder, I have the voting power to override the board on directional strategy. And if you look at page 5, you'll see the resignation letters I've prepared for 7 of you. Sterling went pale. You can't fire us. I just did, Sarah said. She nodded to the door where Marcus Reynolds was waiting with a team of security guards. Security will escort you out. Take your personal items. Leave the company laptops. As Sterling and his cronies were marched out of the room sputtering with indignation, the room felt instantly lighter. Sarah looked at the 5 remaining members, the ones who had tried to vote against Thorne in the past, and been silenced. Now, Sarah said, sitting down in the head chair for the first time, let's get to work. We have a lot of messes to clean up. 3 months later, the dust had finally settled. Vance Global was trading steady. The Waitress CEO narrative had shifted from a tabloid scandal to a Cinderella story of American grit. But Sarah felt untethered. She spent her days in meetings, her nights reviewing contracts. She missed the noise. She missed the simplicity of a job where the biggest problem was a cold steak. On a rainy Tuesday night, she found herself standing outside l'Orangerie. She hadn't been back since the night she fled. The golden awning still looked the same. The menu in the window was still overpriced. She pushed through the heavy oak doors. The restaurant was buzzing. The clinking of silverware, the murmur of conversation, it washed over her like a familiar song. The maître d'un new man she didn't recognize hurried over. Do you have a reservation, madame? No, Sarah said. Just a table for one. In the back, please. He led her to a small table near the kitchen doors. It was the bad section, the place they sat tourists and people who didn't look rich enough. Sarah smiled. It was perfect. She watched the staff. They moved with that frantic, controlled chaos she knew so well. She saw a young waitress, no older than 20, struggling with a heavy tray of seafood towers. Her hair was frizzy from the humidity, and she looked like she was about to cry. Sarah watched as the girl bumped into a chair. The tray wobbled. In a split second, Sarah was out of her seat. Instinct took over. She caught the edge of the tray just before it tipped, steadying the girl's hand. Easy, Sarah whispered. Shift your weight to your heels. Elbows in. The girl looked at her eyes wide with panic. Thank you. Oh my God, thank you. If I dropped this Henri, I mean the manager would kill me. No, he wouldn't, Sarah said softly. It's just crab legs. It's not a kidney transplant. Take a breath. The girl exhaled, centering herself. She looked at Sarah, really looked at her. You look familiar. Have you eaten here before? I used to work here, Sarah said, a small smile playing on her lips. A long time ago. She sat back down. She ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, a house salad and a bottle of sparkling water. She ate slowly, soaking in the atmosphere, remembering the girl she used to be. The girl who was afraid of her rent. The girl who thought she was invisible. When the bill came, it was 28 €28. Sarah took out a black ballpoint pen. She filled out the receipt. In the tip line, she didn't write a percentage. She wrote a number 50 €50. She signed her name, Sarah Vance. She stood up and walked toward the exit. As she reached the door, she heard a gasp from behind her. Then a shriek, then the sound of a tray clattering to the floor. This time, nobody cared. Miss Vance! The young waitress ran after her, bursting out onto the sidewalk, clutching the receipt like a lifeline. Miss Vance, wait, I can't take this. It's a mistake. Sarah turned around. The rain was soft now, a gentle mist. It's not a mistake, Sarah said. It's a severance package. Severance? The girl stammered. Am I fired? No, Sarah smiled. But you don't belong here carrying trays for people who don't look you in the eye. Use that money. Go to school. Start a business. Write a book. Do whatever it is you dream about when you're staring at the clock at midnight. The girl was crying now, tears mixing with the rain on her face. Why would you do this? Sarah looked at the girl and then up at the towering skyline of New York, where the lights of Vance Global shone in the distance. Because someone once dropped a file at my feet, Sarah said, and it reminded me that I had a name. Now you know you have one too. Sarah Vance turned and walked into the night, leaving the restaurant behind her forever. She wasn't the waitress anymore. She wasn't just the CEO. She was the architect of her own fate, and for the first time in her life, she was finally free. And that is the story of Sarah Vance, the woman who went from serving tables to running an empire, all because of one dropped file, and the courage to pick it up. It reminds us that sometimes the biggest monsters are hiding in plain sight, wearing expensive suits, and the strongest heroes are the ones we overlook every single day. Justice might be blind, but it definitely has a sense of irony. If you enjoyed this story of karma, revenge, and justice, please smash that. Like button, it really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell, so you never miss a new story. What would you do if you found a file with your name on it? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.